So getting us set for the day and the open, Scott Phillips from the Motley Fool joins me now. Scott, good morning to you. Now, is it any surprise that we've seen this volatility continue on Wall Street? 145% tariffs being put on Chinese exports by the US.
Oh man, Nadine, good morning. I laughed in the open because the pregnant pause when you said good morning tells us everything about what's going on this week. The weeks felt like a month, and that's kind of the way that we've got used to dealing with President Trump in the aftermath of his inauguration, of course. And what is the on again, off again? I saw a great meme this morning with the old rabbit season, duck season, the Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and they're pulling signs off the tree. And so tariffs are on, tariffs are off, tariffs are on, tariffs are off. Kind of the world we're living in right now, right? Any surprise? No. I've said earlier in the week, and this is the thing, like I try and be a reasonable straight shooter. I thought the falls were overdone, but I also thought yesterday's recovery was overdone. And it's kind of one of those things where we like share prices going up, of course, but you got to call a spade a bloody shovel at some point. And the falls were too significant, given, frankly, Trump's, history, reputation of changing his mind, of not sticking to something. It was overdone. The recovery, though, the rally was silly. A 9.5% jump on Wall Street, a 12% jump on the Nasdaq, on the basis of, it wasn't even called a tariff pause. It wasn't. It was a reduction for some countries back to 10%. Those who are already on 10%, like Australia, stuck with that 10%. He was increasing China to what we said, or what he said was 125% yesterday. And you kind of go, well, so there's a bit of a back down on some countries for some period of time, maybe. That was, the falls weren't justified, as I said, but the recovery itself also wasn't justified. That massive jump was silly. And then overnight, we find out the 125% Trump said was actually 145%, because apparently he'd forgotten about the original 20% tariffs he put on China. So, no, I'm not surprised that the market fell overnight. And again, it's part new news, and it's partly just the reaction to what I think was too much optimism the day before. We all need a long, cold shower, mate, quite honestly. This is going to be a longer, more drawn-out issue. By the way, when I say the tariff fall, or the price falls were too much, there is real economic damage is going to be done by these tariffs. So I'm not saying that any price falls weren't justified if the tariffs go in place, if they remain in place, if they remain at the levels that are currently planned. Then I think it's very likely we end up with the US recession. You and I talked about this on Tuesday.
Yeah.
We're going to have a very high chance of a US recession, a modest chance of a global recession. So yeah, in that case, company profits will be lower, share prices should be lower. None of those things should be a surprise. But the degree to which people are running from side to side on the ship, we're kind of listing to port, listing to starboard as we'll run from one side to the other and over again. Honestly, it makes people look a bit silly, quite frankly. Again, because we simply don't know how long these are going to last. So, yeah, no surprise overnight they fell back, probably, to more reasonable levels, frankly, given, not even levels in total, just yesterday's 10% jump was silly. So some common sense or cooler heads or something, probably not a surprise.
Yeah, you said if, and take a cold shower.
Right.
So, and I know that it is hard to sort of talk, in generalizations, but is that a strategy to just sit this one out and watch how things unfold?
You can, yes. The problem is sitting out means going to cash. And the problem is that we know markets rise over time. So if you're going to try and time the market, frankly, if you're going to jump out of the market, you should start at least by knowing you've been able to forecast these things predictably, repeatedly over a very long period of time. I've mentioned to you before, there were some really smart investors who jumped out of the market during the very onset of COVID. So I'm not getting back until the pandemic finished. That took 2 years. Meanwhile, the market recovered almost all of its losses. So you've got to be really careful with sitting it out because you are betting against history. Now, yes, Trump is unpredictable, let me be kind. And yes, the future is hard to foresee in any case, let alone when you got the so-called leader of the free world just flip-flopping daily on the tariff announcements. So I don't blame people for wanting to be a little bit careful. I don't think sitting out is the right answer unless you can time the market. I think very, very, very few people can. Don't let your ego take you away. What you should be doing, though, in my view, is doing that long-term investing thing and simply saying, right, let's look out 5 years. At that point, Trump's gone. Who knows what he does in the remainder of his term? Who knows what the new president does at some point in the beginning of their new term? And then you say, right, well, at that point, how can I think about the companies that I own? Is it likely that I'll take Woolies, I don't own shares, it's not a recommendation of ours, but just an easy one to reference. Is it likely Woolies selling more baked beans and more toilet paper in 5 years' time? Is it likely there are more stores? Is it likely they're more profitable? Okay, how much should I pay for that? Now, that's not an easy question to answer, but you don't have to avoid investing in total just to avoid potentially the big falls. If you don't want volatility, you shouldn't be investing in shares anyway. Frankly, you should be doing something else. Hopefully all your viewers know that the share market is volatile. This is what comes with the territory. And so we've got to start with that and say, right, where do we go next. Assume the volatility. Look at businesses that are going to be bigger and better in 3, 5, 10 years' time, regardless of what happens in the short term. There are, by the way, very good reasons to sit out some companies. I don't know any aluminium or steel companies right now, given the global tariffs on those. I wouldn't want to be invested in, heavily in Chinese companies, for example, that are sending product to the US. So there are some punches you absolutely should and probably could pull, but I don't think you should avoid investing altogether.
Okay, so we heard from the RBA Governor Michelle Bullock last night saying that monetary policy here has plenty of firepower to deal with uncertainty to come, obviously not giving anything away ahead of the next meeting, as things do remain so uncertain as well. But you went to Woolies, you went to the consumer names. Of course, those are often regarded as more defensive because it's consumer staples, population rises, migration rises, you're going to be selling more meat pies or whatever it is at Woolies. However, how, in your view, are the more discretionary retailers placed here in Australia when you consider the uncertainty out there? I mean, as much as markets don't like uncertainty, if consumers think the world's going to hell in a handbasket, they're not going to go out and spend, well, unless their interest rates go down.
Well, and that's right? So you got so much going on right now. We've actually seen retail sales continue to improve over the last little while for some companies, largely because things aren't necessarily great. They're just less worse than they were. My working assumption at the moment, based on some of those retail numbers, and I'm reverse engineering, I'm not making predictions or forecasts, but if you look at what's actually happening, the money's actually being spent. If you look at, say, some of the discretionary retailers, you're seeing sales grow after a couple of years of decline. And my assumption is kind of two things. Firstly, we're getting a little bit more in our pockets. Wages are increasing. They're increasing faster than inflation for the first time in a few years. And interest rates, even though they only just started falling very recently, over the past year haven't gone up. Now, if you're thinking about what does normal feel like for people, it feels like it's not getting worse. I've covered my bills. I now have a bit more money than I used to. I can go and no one says, great, I'm going to go open the floodgate, start spending again. It's just that kind of regular ratcheting down of, okay, save a bit more, buy a bit less, buy a bit less. The pressure just starts to lessen a little bit on that. There's a little bit more money left in the wallet of the purse at the end of the month or end of the week or end of the fortnight. You can go and start spending. I think that's kind of what we're starting to see with discretionary retail. Now, to your point, what comes next is anyone's guess, right? Consumer confidence took a massive hit on the latest Roy Morgan numbers out last week. Maybe it was earlier this week. It's been a long week. But half the survey was done before the tariff announcement, half after the tariff announcement. So what I think we can reasonably assume or infer is that, while the overall confidence fell, very, very likely most of that was post-tariff. In other words, next time this survey is taken in a completely post-tariff world, or post-announcement world, I should say, what I think we might see is consumer confidence drop even more. So you're right to ask that question. On the flip side, if wages keep rising, if unemployment remains low, takes us back to the chance of a global recession, an Australian recession, of course, and do we have something that happens, and we don't yet know. If those two things, though, if we can avoid a local recession, if unemployment remains low, if rates start to come down or keep coming down, and we see wages start to rise or continue to rise, then we should actually see a bit of a widening, a bit of extra saving or spending potential. Now, they've got an election on right now, by the way, and that could mean anything to anybody. Energy subsidies potentially coming if Labor win, petrol excise cuts if the LNP win. But either way, it does feel to me like a potential loosening with that very, very, very bit asterisk on the corner, which is it depends on what happens out of the US, depends if there is a US recession, a result in global recession, and potentially a result in Australian recession as a result.
Okay, any companies just quickly that come to mind here locally that might play into that whole sort of thesis that you painted there?
Yeah, so we're looking at two things, right? You mentioned kind of the macro story. Let's also think about the price. And sometimes things are cheap enough that you can kind of take that risk. Two I particularly like, both start with both discretionary retailers, both I own, so get those out of the way, Adore and Adore Beauty. Adore's home furnishings, super discretionary, right? If we do have a recession, if there is a big downturn, yes, expect that sales will continue to, or will return to decline. I mentioned before, Adore's had a couple of years of really poor year-on-year sales, except the last half was up really strongly. The first 7 weeks when they gave that announcement of their new financial half was up even more strongly. So this is a business that is bouncing back, I think, because consumers are out there spending, as I said. The other one's Adore Beauty. This is more speculative. It's more risky. It's a small business trying to make its way in the online world, going to open some physical stores. It remains to be seen if they can find that growth. Less confidence about Adore, but massive upside relatively to Adore's, for example. So bigger risk, bigger return. If it can convince consumers, it's not even about the macro. It's can you convince enough consumers to continue or to start shopping online for beauty products? If you can, Adore is there ready to take those sales. So if that macro theme works and Adore can capitalize on it, I think there's very big upside. If they can't, it's probably not worth the current price. So bigger risk, bigger reward, but I do like both those companies. I own them both.